The Good Shepherd, a soothing bedtime tale with Jesus. This biblical metaphor serves as both spiritual teaching and sleep meditation, naturally guiding you toward restful sleep. The words, "I know my sheep and my sheep know me," transformed from theological concept to experiential reality as you imagine being carried to safety, creating the perfect transition into peaceful rest as you encounter this timeless story of divine care. Have you ever considered how the natural elements in biblical narratives serve as metaphors for our own spiritual journeys toward rest? The ancient hillsides of Judea, with their undulating contours and gentle slopes, provided the perfect setting for shepherds to tend their flocks as the day gradually surrendered to evening. In these pastoral landscapes, where heaven seemed to touch earth at the horizon, shepherds would guide their sheep through verdant pastures and beside still waters, embodying an occupation that would later become one of the most enduring metaphors in religious tradition. As the golden light of late afternoon spread across the Judean countryside, a shepherd moved deliberately among his flock, his weathered staff occasionally redirecting a wandering sheep. The air carried the sweet scent of wild thyme and hyssop that grew abundantly between the rocks. This was the hour when shadows lengthened and the shepherd's thoughts turned toward finding suitable shelter for the night. His experienced eyes, lined with years of vigilance under the Mediterranean sun, regularly scanned the western horizon for signs of change. In the distance, dark clouds began to gather over the hills, their edges tinged with deep purple and gray. This atmospheric transformation mirrored that liminal space between active wakefulness and the uncertainty preceding sleep, that threshold where consciousness begins to loosen its grip. The shepherd recognized these meteorological harbingers with the intuitive knowledge born from years of reading nature's signs, his callous fingers tightening slightly around his staff. The flock continued their peaceful grazing, oblivious to the approaching weather system. Sheep moved slowly across the hillside, their rhythmic chewing creating a gentle symphony of contentment. Among them, one particular lamb stood out, its wool pristinely white as freshly fallen snow, catching the golden rays of the setting sun in such a way that it seemed illuminated from within. This small lamb moved with a curious energy, occasionally stopping to investigate interesting plants or sounds with a sensitivity that distinguished it from the others. In ancient Near Eastern culture, the shepherd's responsibility extended far beyond mere employment. The shepherd embodied a profound commitment to the well-being of the flock, a responsibility that encompassed protection, provision, and intimate knowledge of each animal's needs and tendencies. This cultural understanding formed the foundation for Jesus' later self-identification as the Good Shepherd, a metaphor that revealed the divine commitment to human flourishing and protection. When Jesus proclaimed, "I am the Good Shepherd" in John's Gospel, his audience immediately understood the profound implications of such an identity claim. The cool evening air now carried the distinct metallic scent of impending rain. The shepherd, noting the darkening sky and feeling the subtle shift in barometric pressure, began his methodical preparations. With practiced whistles and the strategic movement of his staff, he began guiding his flock toward a nearby enclosure, a simple stone structure built into the hillside that offered protection from the elements. The sheep, responding to familiar commands, began to move as a unified body toward shelter, their varied bleats creating a chorus of compliance and occasional protest. A remarkable parallel exists between these changing atmospheric conditions and our own transition from daily activities to nighttime reflection. As day yields to night, our consciousness undergoes transformation. External activity gives way to internal processing. The visible world recedes as our minds prepare for the invisible realm of dreams and restoration. The shepherd understood this rhythm instinctively, his own body and mind attuned to these natural transitions through years of living in harmony with creation's patterns. As the flock moved closer to their shelter, the first distant rumbles of thunder reverberated across the hills of Galilee. These acoustic warnings traveled through the air with a low resonance that seemed to emerge from the earth itself. The sheep quickened their pace slightly, their innate sensitivity to approaching storms manifesting in more purposeful movement. The shepherd remained calm, his steady presence communicating security to the flock despite the intensifying atmospheric drama unfolding around them. The shepherd's relationship with each individual sheep represented an intimate knowledge that transcended mere numerical accounting. He recognized distinctive characteristics in each animal, peculiar markings, unique behavioral patterns, specific needs. In the cultural context of first-century Palestine, this personal knowledge was expressed through the practice of naming, as referenced in John 10 verse 3. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. This naming practice established individual identity within the collective security of the flock. As evening descended more fully and the storm drew nearer, the shepherd guided his flock through the narrow entrance of the stone enclosure. The structure, built with generations of accumulated wisdom, provided effective protection against the elements while allowing sufficient ventilation. Inside, the sheep began settling into familiar patterns, finding their preferred spaces within the communal arrangement. The shepherd stood at the entrance, his silhouette framed against the increasingly turbulent sky as he methodically counted each sheep entering the fold. This counting ritual served multiple purposes: ensuring the flock's complete safety, maintaining accountability for each animal under his care, and establishing a framework for the narrative that would unfold through the approaching night. The shepherd's lips moved silently as he tracked each animal's entry, his mental calculation corresponding with his intimate knowledge of the expected total. As the last sheep appeared to enter the shelter, his experienced eyes surveyed the gathered flock once more, his internal inventory suddenly registering a discrepancy. But as the last sheep entered the shelter, the shepherd's experienced eyes noticed something amiss. The count was one short. That single numerical discrepancy represented far more than a mere accounting error. It signified the profound vulnerability of one small creature, now facing the advancing storm alone. Within the moments following separation, a peculiar transformation occurs. Security dissolves into uncertainty, and the familiar landscape suddenly appears foreign and imposing. This transition mirrors our own experience as consciousness begins to yield to sleep, that liminal space where we relinquish control and enter vulnerability. The little lamb had been drawn to a particularly sweet patch of grass growing on the hillside's edge. While the shepherd had begun gathering the flock toward shelter, this small creature remained captivated by immediate satisfaction, its nose buried in tender blades, oblivious to the gradual movement of its companions toward safety. The vegetation, verdant and abundant, had led the lamb beyond the shepherd's immediate sight. The lamb lifted its head only after satisfying its hunger, discovering the alarming absence of both flock and shepherd. The realization came in stages, first a curious tilt of its head at the unusual quiet, then widening eyes as its gaze swept across the empty hillside. The sky had transformed from afternoon blue to threatening gray, clouds massing in dark formations that pressed downward upon the solitary creature below. A soft, questioning bleat emerged from the lamb, tentative at first, expecting the reassuring answer of its companions or the familiar voice of its shepherd. Only silence returned. Its ears flicked forward then back. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The lamb's call grew more urgent, rising in pitch with each unanswered cry. Its small hooves shifted nervously against the soil, leaving tiny imprints that would soon be washed away. The first raindrops landed with gentle persistence upon its wool. Initially, these created small, cool impressions against the lanolin-rich fibers. As precipitation intensified, water began penetrating toward skin, creating a chill that contrasted sharply with the warmth it had known surrounded by the flock. Each raindrop marked the storm's advancing reality. In theological terms, this state of being lost carries profound significance. The separation represents more than physical distance. It signifies a spiritual condition of disconnection from divine protection and provision. Throughout scriptural narrative, being lost frequently precedes the profound experience of being found, creating essential dramatic tension through which divine love demonstrates its persistent nature. The lamb's condition mirrors those moments in spiritual journeys when certainty yields to questioning, when familiar structures of orientation dissolve. The rain intensified. The lamb moved instinctively toward a small olive tree standing in isolation on the hillside. It pressed its body against the weathered bark, seeking position where the canopy might intercept the falling rain. For a brief interval, this strategy provided modest relief. The raindrops' rhythm altered as they filtered through leaves above. This comfort proved inadequate as the storm gathered momentum. Wind drove water sideways beneath the tree's limited protection. The leaves became saturated, transforming from shelter to secondary source of heavier drops that fell with greater weight upon the lamb. What had appeared as sanctuary revealed itself as merely temporary and insufficient barrier against the elements' assault. Darkness compounded the lamb's vulnerability. Landmarks that might have guided its return became indistinct, then invisible. The progressive narrowing of its sensory world intensified isolation. No longer could it scan the landscape for signs of the flock or shepherd. Its wool hung heavy now, water dripping steadily from its saturated edges. The darkness imposed limitations that restricted capacity for self-rescue, rendering it dependent upon external intervention for salvation. The convergence of these elements led the lamb to its most instinctive response. It curled its body inward, tucking its legs beneath its torso and lowering its head. A small shiver rippled visibly through its frame. This posture, minimizing surface area exposure to the elements, represented a universal emotion known across species, the profound longing for protection when one's resources prove inadequate against external threats. The rain continued its persistent assault, gradually soaking through the wool until skin registered the continuous chill of exposure. In this moment of isolation, the lamb's experience reflected a fundamental reality of existence, the universal need for care beyond our capacity to provide for ourselves. Its small form, huddled beneath inadequate shelter, embodied the essential vulnerability that precedes grace, that state of recognized need creating the necessary condition for receiving care. A plaintive bleat escaped, softer now, strength diminishing as the cold seeped deeper. The storm's elements continued their relentless progression, while the lamb's diminishing energy rendered it increasingly still beneath the olive tree's insufficient canopy. Meanwhile, in the secure shelter of the fold, the Good Shepherd had already noticed the absence of one precious member of his flock. The shepherd's count revealed more than a numerical imbalance. It exposed an absence that provoked within him a profound unease unlike typical concern. Within the theological understanding of divine love, what would compel someone to leave 99 secure sheep to face a threatening storm for just one wayward lamb? This question penetrates the very essence of sacrificial care and reveals something extraordinary about the nature of true shepherding. Standing at the entrance of the fold, the shepherd's gaze swept across his gathered flock with measured precision. His familiarity with each animal allowed him to identify not merely that one was missing, but precisely which one. The small lamb with particularly woolly ears that often strayed toward the sweeter grasses. The realization settled in his chest with a weight that transcended mere responsibility. This absence represented a being entrusted to his care. The decision confronting him embodied a profound theological paradox. Outside, the elements gathered force, wind driving heavy raindrops sideways against the shelter's walls, thunder reverberating with increasing proximity, darkness descending with unnatural swiftness. Inside stood 99 protected sheep, their collective value substantial, their safety assured by his continued presence. The shepherd stood between these realities, contemplating a compassion that assigns infinite worth to a single life. This moment resembles a parent who, upon discovering one child missing from a family gathering, immediately abandons the comfort of home to search through a dangerous storm. The mathematics of love operates differently than conventional calculation, where the absence of one child renders the security of all others temporarily secondary to the rescue mission at hand. Conventional wisdom would suggest preserving the majority, protecting the greater good, minimizing risk. Yet something deeper stirred within him, reflecting the divine economy where value derives from relationship rather than quantity. This principle forms the heart of Jesus' parable, asking whether one would not leave the 99 to search for the one stray. His internal calculation was brief. Each member of his flock possessed individual worth beyond statistical significance. The question transformed from whether to go to determining the swiftest path to locate the missing lamb. His movements took on deliberate urgency. He secured the fold's entrance with practiced efficiency, arranging barriers against predators. The shepherd retrieved his staff, a multipurpose tool essential for navigating treacherous terrain and defending against threats. Its familiar weight provided reassurance as he contemplated the darkening landscape. Reaching for his heavy outer cloak, the shepherd wrapped it securely around his shoulders and fastened it at his neck. The woolen garment, treated with oils to repel moisture, would provide essential protection against the elements. Though it would eventually become saturated in the downpour, its initial resistance would grant precious time before the cold could penetrate to his skin. Before departing, he cast a final evaluative glance across the fold. The remaining sheep had settled into their familiar groupings, mothers with lambs, siblings beside siblings, creating a living tapestry of community and shared warmth. Their safety momentarily assured, he turned his attention outward toward the solitary lamb facing the storm alone. This pivotal decision illuminates the theological core of divine love. God values each soul as an irreplaceable creation of infinite worth, never abandoning even one to the dangers of isolation. The shepherd's knowledge of each sheep by name reflects a profound theological truth about divine relationship. This isn't merely identification but intimate recognition, knowing their distinct personalities, tendencies, strengths, and vulnerabilities. Such comprehensive knowledge mirrors God's relationship with humanity, as expressed in sacred texts, suggesting that even the hairs on our heads are numbered. The shepherd's determination to find the missing lamb arises from this depth of relationship. Rain had begun falling with increasing intensity as he stood at the threshold between shelter and storm. The dichotomy was stark. Behind him warmth and security, before him darkness and turbulence. His body instinctively leaned toward safety, yet his heart pulled him toward the vulnerable one exposed to danger. In this moment of hesitation, the shepherd embodied the tension between self-preservation and sacrificial love. With a decisive step forward, he crossed this threshold into the full force of the elements. The immediate sensation of cold raindrops striking his face and the wind's resistance against his body served as physical manifestations of the cost of his choice. Yet his expression revealed no regret, only determination. Each step carried him farther from comfort and closer to his purpose, demonstrating that the value of one lost lamb outweighed personal convenience, comfort, and even safety. The rain quickly saturated his outer garments, water tracking down his neck despite the protection of his hood. The path, now slick with mud, required careful navigation to avoid injury that would impede his search. Yet these physical discomforts registered as mere background awareness compared to his primary focus, locating the lamb before exposure, predators, or the worsening storm could claim it. This moment embodies the theological concept of divine commitment, the willingness to enter into suffering for the sake of relationship. Just as the shepherd entered the storm to seek his lamb, divine love manifests in the willingness to experience discomfort and vulnerability for the sake of those who are lost. The mathematics of such love operates on principles where leaving 99 to seek one makes perfect sense. Divine mathematics may justify the shepherd's journey into darkness, but what of the lamb's experience as the tempest enveloped its small frame? As thunder reverberated across the hillsides and cold rain penetrated to skin, the storm became a manifestation of spiritual isolation that mirrors our own darkest moments before rest. The tempest that enveloped the hillside represented a fundamentally different reality for the lamb than for the shepherd. Distant rumbles transformed into an overwhelming assault on the senses. Thunder shook the ground beneath the lamb's hooves, while lightning cast grotesque, momentary shadows. This disorienting cycle of darkness and blinding light created a primal disquiet within the small creature's heart, a visceral embodiment of fear that transcended mere physical discomfort. The sensory experience manifested as bone-penetrating cold as wind found pathways through the lamb's once protective wool. The lamb's body trembled involuntarily, while its nostrils filled with the sharp, electric scent of rain-soaked earth and ozone. Within this physical suffering emerged a deeper awareness, a wordless understanding that it stood utterly alone against forces vast and indifferent to its existence. In biblical contexts, storms carry profound spiritual symbolism, representing moments of divine testing and potential transformation. The disciples experienced terror when waves threatened their vessel on the Sea of Galilee. The Lamb now encountered that same primal fear, the recognition that forces beyond one's control have been unleashed. Environmental chaos manifested as profound emotional disturbance, where external tumult directly mirrored internal spiritual upheaval. The hollow beneath the olive tree, initially providing shelter, betrayed the lamb as water pooled around its hooves. Wind-driven rain penetrated this modest refuge, forcing abandonment of what little security it had known. Each direction offered only further exposure, as though the storm had become a conscious entity seeking the most vulnerable creature on the hillside. The lamb stumbled forward, driven by instinct rather than intention. Its eyes blinking against stinging rain, barely discerned shapes in darkness. Familiar paths transformed into bewildering terrain. A small gully easily crossed hours earlier, now channeled a rushing stream. The lamb's attempt to leap across resulted in a frightening tumble, leaving its fleece soaked and muddied. This disorientation served as a physical manifestation of spiritual testing. Like the psalmist who cried, "Deep calls to deep in the roar of your waterfalls, all your waves and breakers have swept over me." The lamb experienced a fundamental sense of abandonment, a crisis of both body and spirit. The external chaos corresponded precisely to its internal state. Lost, confused, and bereft of guidance. Each attempt to find the path home led farther from safety. Landmarks were obscured by darkness and transformed by water. A familiar stone now sat in a puddle reflecting fragmented lightning. A distinctive tree bent at an unrecognizable angle. The storm had rendered the landscape foreign and threatening, much as spiritual crises transform our understanding of ourselves and our place in creation. This progressive disorientation mirrors human anxiety that intensifies as night approaches. As darkness falls, our minds amplify concerns that daylight might diminish, creating spirals of worry that interfere with restful sleep. The lamb's increasingly erratic movements, first one direction then another, echoed this pattern of escalating distress without resolution. The lamb's vocalizations evolved throughout the night. Questioning bleats diminished into sounds of increasing desperation. Each call expended precious energy yet brought no response except the storm's echo. These cries grew weaker from the simple exhaustion of a small creature overwhelmed by circumstances beyond its capacity to manage. This weakening reflected emotional depletion from prolonged isolation, the gradual surrender of hope that characterizes the darkest moments of human spirit. The lamb moved beyond fear into resignation, where survival became the only consideration, and warmth the only desire. Its physical suffering had become indistinguishable from its spiritual desolation. After what seemed an eternity of wandering, the lamb found a depression beneath an overhanging rock. This hollow, barely large enough for its frame, offered minimal protection from horizontal rain. The lamb pressed against the stone surface, seeking residual warmth. Yet even this refuge left it exposed to cold, fear, and most significantly, solitude. In this moment of fragile shelter, the lamb experienced contemplative exhaustion, that state where physical depletion creates spiritual vulnerability. The storm continued its assault, but the lamb lacked energy to flee. This enforced stillness created a moment of clarity amid chaos, where existence narrowed to the simplest awareness. I am here, I am alone, and I am insufficient to my own needs. This experience of insufficiency reflects a theological truth about the human condition. We face storms exceeding our capacity to navigate alone. The Tempest reveals not just physical limitations but spiritual dependence, our fundamental need for something beyond ourselves. In stillness, even the stillness of despair, this truth becomes inescapable. Yet even as the lamb trembled in its inadequate refuge, unseen footsteps were already approaching through the darkness of the storm. Those unseen footsteps belonged to one who understood the mathematics of love differently than most, one who calculated value not by the 99 safely gathered, but by the single life trembling in darkness. The shepherd moved through the tempest with methodical precision, his eyes narrowed against the stinging rain as he traced familiar pathways now rendered alien by darkness and storm. His call pierced the howling wind. Not a shout of command but a voice of recognition, speaking a name that carried both identity and belonging. The biblical shepherd's determination reveals a profound theological truth. Divine pursuit intensifies precisely when conditions deteriorate. Unlike human resolve that often falters when circumstances grow challenging, the shepherd's commitment strengthened as the elements assailed him. Each step became increasingly laborious, yet his pace never slackened, driven by something far deeper than duty. What logic drives such persistence? The shepherd's search reflects a divine mathematics wherein a single lost life justifies extraordinary effort. This reveals something essential about God's character. His pursuit is governed by the intrinsic worth he assigns to each member of his flock. Biblical imagery consistently portrays shepherds as committed caretakers who would leave the 99 to search for one lost sheep, symbolizing the divine pursuit of the individual. The shepherd paused at a steep ravine where waters cascaded down its sides. Here was a place where lambs had fallen before, their frightened cries echoing from depths difficult to access. He leaned forward, listening beneath the storm's percussion, his entire body focused on detecting the faintest sound that might distinguish his lamb from the ambient noise of nature and tumult. Finding nothing, he continued his exploration, approaching each potential hazard with careful scrutiny. At a thicket of dense thorns he knelt, examining the base where a frightened lamb might seek shelter. His eyes, adjusted to the darkness, searched for any unusual shape or color amid the wet foliage, his gaze reflecting both concern and unwavering hope. The shepherd's staff became an extension of his senses in this obscured landscape, testing treacherous ground, parting concealing vegetation, maintaining balance on slippery slopes. This instrument embodied the dual nature of divine care described in ancient texts. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. This relentless search through darkness mirrors how divine work often occurs in the unseen dimensions of human experience. Just as the shepherd navigated terrain hidden from normal perception, moving confidently through spaces where visibility failed, spiritual transformation frequently unfolds beyond the realm of immediate observation. The most significant divine interventions may occur not in dramatic displays, but in persistent pursuit through the darkened landscapes of human struggle. Theological perspectives emphasize that God's love is so comprehensive that he desires none to be lost, mirroring the shepherd's dedication to finding a single missing sheep. This divine unwillingness to abandon even one soul reveals a love that defies human calculation, where the 99 safely gathered never diminish the importance of the one who wanders. The mathematics of heaven operates on principles where subtraction is never acceptable when it concerns beloved lives. As the shepherd rounded a stone outcropping, the storm momentarily abated. He stopped, becoming perfectly still save for the rise and fall of his chest. In this brief respite, he tilted his head, closing his eyes to enhance his hearing. His posture communicated complete attention, a listening so profound it engaged his entire being, revealing the deep emotional investment in his search. The shepherd's face revealed both concern and hope intermingled. This was not the mechanical search of one fulfilling an obligation, but the deeply personal quest of one who knew intimately whom he sought. Each moment of listening carried the weight of relationship, of history shared between seeker and sought. The shepherd understood this lamb's particular tendencies, its unique voice, the specific timbre of its call when frightened. Such intimate knowledge parallels the divine recognition described in sacred texts. I know my own and my own know me, a mutual relationship that transcends superficial identification. The shepherd doesn't merely identify physical characteristics, but understands the essential nature of each member of his flock. This depth of knowing makes the search profoundly personal, directed toward a specific beloved life. In the temporary lull, something carried on the wind, so faint it might have been imagination. The shepherd's eyes opened, his head turning slightly to better capture the sound. Again it came, a weak bleating nearly indistinguishable from the ambient noises, yet unmistakable to ears trained by years of attentive care. His heart quickened at this confirmation of life, and his eyes betrayed a sudden luminosity that transcended the physical darkness surrounding him. The shepherd's entire countenance transformed. Where there had been determined focus, now appeared something akin to joy, though tempered by awareness of continuing danger. The faint cry confirmed not only location but life. The lamb still breathed, still called, still waited to be found. The distance between separation and reunion had suddenly contracted. No longer methodically searching, the shepherd moved with targeted purpose toward the sound's origin. His movements balanced urgency with precision, creating a rhythm of advancement that matched his quickened heartbeat. The calling continued at intervals, growing clearer as the distance narrowed. He responded with his own voice, establishing an auditory connection across the remaining space. A lifeline guiding both parties toward reunion, embodying the divine promise that what is lost will be found, that separation yields to restoration, that darkness ultimately surrenders to light. 7. The moment of finding. Emotional culmination and relief. In that moment when voices bridge the chasm of separation, something transformative occurs that transcends the mere physical reunion of shepherd and lamb. The trembling creature, huddled beneath its inadequate rocky shelter, first perceives the approach not through sight, for darkness had rendered vision nearly useless, but through the distinctive cadence of familiar speech carrying through the rain-laden air. The shepherd's voice, pitched to convey reassurance rather than alarm, reached the small hollow where the lamb had sought refuge. His words, simple and direct, penetrated the ambient noise of the storm. "Little one, I am here." The lamb's ears pivoted toward this sound, awakening a primal recognition within its frightened consciousness, the reality expressed in John 10 verse 27 where Jesus declares, "My sheep hear my voice, I know them and they follow me." This recognition represents a spiritual awakening, an innate connection between the created and its creator that persists through perceived abandonment. As the shepherd's silhouette materialized through the curtain of rain, the lamb experienced conflicting impulses, hope mingling with lingering fear. Its body remained tense, poised between retreat further into the crevice and the vulnerable act of emerging toward the approaching figure. The shepherd, perceiving this hesitation, approached with measured movements. Unlike the violent, unpredictable motions of the storm, his actions conveyed steadiness and purpose. He knelt in the sodden earth outside the hollow, disregarding the mud that immediately saturated his garments. "I have come for you," the shepherd spoke, his voice lowered to a gentle timbre that resonated beneath the storm's cacophony. "You are mine, and I have searched across the hillside to find you." Each syllable carried the weight of purpose and the promise of protection. The lamb's small form quivered, its eyes reflecting both yearning and uncertainty in the dim light. The shepherd extended his weathered hand slowly into the hollow, palm upward in a gesture that invited rather than compelled. His patience reflected the divine approach to human hearts, offering presence without coercion, invitation without demand. The spiritual parallel reveals the divine search for humanity culminating in extended relationship and offered sanctuary. When the shepherd's fingers finally made contact with the lamb's drenched wool, warmth transferred between them like a current. This first touch, a gentle pressure against the cold, wet fleece, communicated security in a language more fundamental than words. The lamb flinched momentarily at the contact, then pressed almost imperceptibly into the warmth. The shepherd's hands moved with practiced tenderness, assessing the lamb for injury while simultaneously providing the first sensation of comfort it had experienced since becoming lost. The lamb's physical response revealed much about divine comfort. Its trembling began to subside in discernible waves. The tension held in its small frame released, first in its shoulders, then gradually throughout its body. Its breathing, which had been shallow and rapid, slowed to a more sustainable rhythm. These physical manifestations represented spiritual truths about divine presence transforming distress into restoration. "You have wandered far," the shepherd murmured, his breath visible in the cold air as his hands moved methodically across the lamb's back, removing twigs and burrs entangled in its coat. This immediate care demonstrates a theological truth. Divine rescue involves not merely locating the lost, but beginning their restoration in the very place of their suffering. The shepherd initiated healing amid the ongoing storm. As trust gradually overcame fear, the lamb leaned toward the shepherd's touch. This subtle shift represented spiritual surrender, the moment when self-protection yields to the recognition of care beyond self. The lamb's posture transformed from defensive isolation to receptive vulnerability, mirroring the human spiritual journey from self-reliance to divine dependence. With infinite care, the shepherd's hands moved beneath the lamb's body, supporting its weight as he lifted it from the muddy hollow. This transition, from ground to arms, symbolizes the movement from earthly security to divine embrace. The lamb's hooves left the solid earth, creating momentary disorientation quickly replaced by the security of being held against the shepherd's chest. The shepherd adjusted his stance, cradling the lamb against himself to allow maximum transfer of his body heat to the chilled creature. This physical warmth served as tangible evidence of the care the lamb had only heard in his voice moments before. The lamb's small head rested against the shepherd's chest, where the steady heartbeat provided counterpoint to the chaotic sounds of the continuing storm. This position, the shepherd bearing the rescued lamb against his chest, reflects an essential theological truth. The shepherd did not merely point the way back to the fold but physically lifted the creature, assuming responsibility for its journey home. Similarly, divine grace provides the means of traversal through direct support and carried burden. The lamb's experience transformed in this embrace. The rain that had previously assaulted it now fell harmlessly on the shepherd's back. The cold that had penetrated to its bones retreated before the steady heat of the shepherd's body. The disorientation of isolation was replaced by the security of being held by one whose heartbeat provided both rhythm and reassurance. The shepherd adjusted his cloak, creating a protective barrier around the lamb. Through this simple act of covering, he established a microclimate of safety amid continuing adversity. The storm had not ceased. Rain still fell, wind still gusted, but these elements no longer reached the lamb directly. This reality provides profound insight into divine protection, which often operates not by removing storms, but by providing shelter within them. Have you ever wondered why divine protection rarely removes us from life's storms, but instead carries us through them? As the shepherd adjusted his stance and prepared for the journey home, the harsh elements continued their assault. Yet for the lamb, everything had fundamentally changed. The storm raged on, but its perspective had been transformed by the simple yet profound reality of being carried in the shepherd's arms. The journey back to the fold would traverse the same treacherous landscape over which the lamb had stumbled alone. The shepherd tightened his cloak around the small creature, creating a protective pocket against his chest. Within this sanctuary, the lamb experienced a remarkable paradox. It remained in the midst of the storm yet protected from its full force. This physical arrangement reflected a profound theological truth about divine care. Protection often comes not through removal from adversity, but through intimate presence within it. With each careful step, the shepherd navigated the dangerous return path. His movements were deliberate and confident, unlike the lamb's earlier frantic wandering. He extended his staff before each step, testing the ground for unseen hazards that might endanger his precious cargo. The mud that had earlier trapped the lamb's hooves now yielded to the shepherd's experienced navigation. Though the path remained objectively difficult, it presented an entirely different experience when traversed in the shepherd's capable care. The ancient prophet Isaiah captured this form of divine protection perfectly. He tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. This image reveals something essential about God's approach to human suffering. The Good Shepherd transforms our experience within trials through his sustaining presence, rather than altering the external landscape of our difficulties. As they continued their journey, the lamb's internal experience underwent a profound transformation. The elements that had earlier caused such distress now registered differently. Most significantly, the lamb's ear pressed against the shepherd's chest detected a steady, powerful rhythm, the shepherd's heartbeat providing a counterpoint to the chaotic sounds surrounding them. This consistent rhythm communicated stability and life in a way that transcended language, becoming a tangible manifestation of peace amid turmoil. The lamb's own racing heart gradually synchronized with the stronger, steadier pulse of its protector. Warmth returned to its extremities as circulation improved. The rhythmic movement of the shepherd's gait created a gentle rocking sensation that soothed the lamb's overstimulated nervous system. This sensory recalibration mirrors the spiritual experience of divine carrying. External circumstances may remain unchanged, while our internal experience is fundamentally altered. The theological significance extends beyond mere comfort. It speaks to a profound truth about God's relationship with each individual soul. The shepherd did not view this lamb as merely 1/100th of his flock's value, but as a unique creation worthy of his full attention and protection. This reflects the divine perspective that assigns immeasurable worth to each person, regardless of conventional metrics of significance. The shepherd continued bearing the full brunt of the storm himself, Rain still plastered his hair to his forehead, and the wind chilled his exposed skin. These physical discomforts registered as insignificant compared to the satisfaction of successful rescue. His willingness to endure these hardships while sheltering the lamb demonstrates a profound theological truth. The shepherd assumes burdens that the lamb cannot bear, paralleling how divine grace addresses human limitations. Occasional glimpses of stars penetrated the darkness through breaks in the cloud cover. These momentary revelations of light provided orientation and confidence that the storm was not endless. Similarly, in spiritual journeys through difficulty, moments of clarity often appear precisely when endurance seems most challenged, offering assurance that darkness will eventually yield to dawn. Within the shepherd's embrace, the lamb's experience of time itself shifted. The frantic, elongated moments of fear gave way to a gentler rhythm. Despite the continuing storm, its body registered that the crisis had passed. Safety was no longer something it needed to secure through its own vigilance. That responsibility had transferred to stronger shoulders. This transition from desperate self-preservation to trusting surrender represents the essence of spiritual rest. The lamb's ability to relax despite continuing external threats reveals an important distinction between circumstantial peace and relationship-based security. True rest emerges not from perfect external conditions, but from perfect trust in the one who carries us. Divine protection does not promise comfortable circumstances, but rather sustained presence within whatever circumstances we face. As they crested a final hill, the sheep pen came into view in the distance. A small oil lamp flickered against the darkness, suggesting warmth, community, and restoration that awaited. This visual promise of their destination provided the shepherd with renewed energy. For the lamb, however, the sight registered only dimly through half-closed eyes. Its world had contracted to the immediate sensations of warmth, rhythm, and safety. The ultimate destination mattered less than the present reality of being carried. The shepherd adjusted his grip slightly, cradling the lamb even more securely as they began the final descent toward home. His intimate knowledge of this particular lamb allowed him to provide precisely the support needed. This personalized care reflects the theological truth that divine guidance is not generic, but tailored to each individual's specific needs and constitution, a promise of both present comfort and future restoration. The power that commands creation itself often remains veiled until the moment its authority becomes necessary. As the shepherd shifted his faithful lamb to accommodate the steep descent, the storm reached a sudden violent crescendo that halted their progress entirely. Few recognize that divine protection extends beyond mere physical embrace. It commands even the forces that generate our fears. When the elements around us spiral beyond our control, what does it reveal about the nature of the one who speaks not only comfort to our hearts but authority to the chaos? The downward path had become treacherous now, with rivulets of water carving miniature canyons through the hillside soil. The shepherd paused, his footing uncertain on the slippery decline. Wind whipped with furious intensity around them, driving horizontal sheets of rain against their exposed forms. Lightning fractured the darkness, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. The lamb tensed as the world around them devolved into tumultuous disorder. Sensing this, the shepherd adjusted his stance to better shield his precious charge. With practiced care, he transferred the lamb to rest securely in the crook of his left arm, pressing it close to the warmth of his chest where his heartbeat remained steady despite the chaos surrounding them. Standing immovable against the gale, the shepherd raised his right hand toward the turbulent heavens. His face, illuminated momentarily by lightning, revealed not fear but a tranquil authority incongruous with their circumstances. His lips moved, forming words that carried power beyond their audible reach. "Peace," he commanded, not with a shout but with quiet, unwavering certainty. "Be still." This moment mirrored the ancient account from the Sea of Galilee, where disciples cowered as their vessel threatened to founder in tempestuous waters. There, too, a voice had spoken with authority over creation, commanding the elements as their rightful sovereign. The theological implications are profound. The same divine authority that established order from primordial chaos retains jurisdiction over creation, intervening when disorder threatens those under divine protection. The response was immediate and transformative. The wind's howl diminished from a roar to a whisper. Rain that had been driving horizontally with stinging force began to fall gently, pattering softly on the earth. The solid canopy of storm clouds fragmented, creating channels through which stars emerged, their light previously obscured, now twinkling between cloud remnants. A crescent moon appeared, its illumination revealing the transformed landscape around them. The shepherd remained motionless, his hand still raised, as if conducting this orchestration of elemental forces. The lamb watched with wide, wondering eyes as creation itself responded to the shepherd's voice. Just as the lamb had recognized the call of its name earlier amidst the storm, now the elements themselves acknowledged their master's command. This demonstration of authority transcends mere physical protection. It reveals a fundamental truth about divine care, that it extends not only to comforting those who suffer through hardship, but to transforming the circumstances themselves. The theological significance cannot be overstated. The same voice that whispers personal reassurance to the individual heart possesses the authority to rebuke the sources of our distress. Modern spiritual understanding often limits divine intervention to internal comfort during external trials. Yet this ancient narrative suggests something more comprehensive, that divine authority encompasses both the intimate dimension of carrying us through difficulties and the cosmic power to command the difficulties themselves. This dual nature of protection mirrors the biblical accounts where Jesus both sympathized with human suffering and exercised authority over its causes. For the Lamb, this revelation transformed its understanding of safety. Security previously meant being carried through the storm, a significant comfort, but with the threat remaining. Now, the Lamb experienced protection in its fullest expression, the threatening elements themselves subdued by the shepherd's authoritative word. This progression mirrors the spiritual journey from the initial comfort of divine presence amid trials to the deeper recognition of divine sovereignty over those trials. As the final remnants of the tempest subsided, the landscape took on an ethereal quality. Mist rose from the rain-soaked ground, creating ghostly forms that danced in the intermittent moonlight. Water droplets transformed ordinary shrubs and rocks into crystalline sculptures reflecting the emerging starlight. The path before them, though still wet, no longer posed the treacherous challenge it had moments earlier. The shepherd adjusted his grip on the lamb, which had relaxed completely against him. What had been a desperate rescue through hostile elements had transformed into a peaceful journey through a tranquil, washed landscape. Occasional distant rumbles served not as threats but as reminders of what had been overcome, like the fading memory of a nightmare after awakening. This transformation reflects the theological truth that divine authority over chaos creates beauty from what was threatening. The freshly washed landscape, with its crisp scents and glistening surfaces, now offered sensory delights rather than dangers. What had been an ordeal became a canvas for displaying renewed creation. For the Lamb, each gentle raindrop that occasionally touched its wool registered as benediction rather than threat. The journey continued with an entirely different quality. Not a desperate trek through hostility, but a peaceful procession toward home. This mirrors the spiritual experience of moving from mere endurance of life's storms to recognition of their potential transformation. The significance extends beyond immediate circumstances. This demonstration of authority establishes that chaos does not have the final word for those under divine care. The elements themselves, seemingly indifferent to individual suffering, remain subject to the same authority that knows each creature by name. Beyond the calming of external storms lies another form of peace, the sanctuary of community. As the shepherd carries his precious charge toward the distant glow of the sheepfold, we encounter a profound truth: that spiritual restoration is never complete until we return to our place among others who share our journey. In the distance, a warm amber light punctuated the darkness, the shepherd's lamp left burning at the entrance of the fold. This flame served as both practical guide and symbol of anticipation, a perpetual welcome awaiting return. The light transformed the rugged stone walls into a beacon of belonging. With each step closer, darkness gave way to light, isolation yielded to communion. When they were still some distance away, the shepherd paused. Drawing a deep breath, he called out with a distinctive greeting that carried across the remaining space. This call marked redemption accomplished, a mission fulfilled despite considerable cost. His voice, though weary from exertion, carried a resonant quality that penetrated the quieting night air. Within the sheepfold, the response was immediate yet measured. Wool-crowned silhouettes rose in unison as ears pivoted toward the familiar voice. The flock's breathing pattern shifted as awareness spread among them. One elder ewe emitted a distinctive low bleat that others quickly echoed, a sound reserved specifically for reunions, carrying ancestral memory of separation overcome. Bodies shifted, creating a small opening within their midst, a space purposefully formed for the returning member. This response revealed the essence of true community. The flock actively participated in reunion, their movement constituting invitation rather than mere accommodation. Within the fold, each member contributed to the collective well-being, creating through their presence a sanctuary no individual could generate alone. As they approached the entrance, the transition became palpable. Raindrops no longer reached them beneath the fold's extended overhang. The air changed quality, from damp, open expanse to the warmer atmosphere of shared breath. The sounds of the residual storm receded, replaced by gentle rustling within. Here at the threshold between isolation and community, between exposure and shelter, the lamb crossed from rescue to restoration. The shepherd ducked slightly as he carried his charge through the entrance. This passage held theological significance beyond its physical reality. The sheepfold embodied divine provision, where individual care extended into communal embrace. In crossing this threshold, the lamb completed a journey from danger to deliverance, from separation to reintegration. The interior revealed itself as their eyes adjusted to the lamp's gentle illumination. The gathered flock appeared as a unified presence, their collective purpose of providing warmth and security, transcending individual distinctions. The packed earth floor, worn smooth by countless hooves, offered solid footing after the uncertain terrain outside. With careful movements, the shepherd knelt within the formed circle. His hands, which had maintained their protective grip throughout the journey, now loosened as he lowered the lamb onto the dry ground. This transfer represented not abandonment but a different phase of care, one that incorporated the broader community into the healing process. The surrounding sheep drew closer, their bodies creating a living enclosure around the returned lamb. One by one, they touched noses with the newcomer, a ritual of recognition that re-established bonds temporarily severed. The warmth of their bodies, the familiar scent of lanolin, the gentle pressure of their presence combined to create an environment of profound acceptance. The returned lamb benefited immediately from this communal embrace. Residual chill dissipated as warmth transferred from surrounding bodies, what the shepherd alone could not provide. This encompassing physical comfort, the community supplied effortlessly through collective presence. This demonstrated a profound truth. Divine care often manifests through mutual support, rather than solely through individual intervention. Within this protective circle, transformation became evident. The lamb's tense posture gradually softened, its breathing deepened to match the rhythm of those around it. The trembling that had persisted through the journey now subsided completely as familiar sensations enveloped it. This process illustrated how spiritual healing requires both dramatic intervention and gentle restoration through community. For the recently returned lamb, reintegration addressed needs beyond the physical. The experience of separation had created not only discomfort but profound alienation, a state contrary to its created purpose. In rejoining the fold, the lamb regained not merely shelter but identity, not only protection but purpose. This moment illustrated the paradoxical nature of true spiritual rest. Such peace comes through connection rather than isolation, through acknowledged interdependence rather than independence. The fold functioned beyond a defensive perimeter. It created an environment where each member contributed to and received from the whole. The lamb's return completed something temporarily broken, not only for itself but for the entire community. As the flock settled once more, a new alignment emerged. The returned lamb found itself integrated within the gathering rather than relegated to the periphery. This physical arrangement reflected a deeper spiritual reality, that belonging constitutes not a concession granted to the lost, but their rightful place within the divine economy. What wandering had disrupted, welcome had now restored. Integration marks the beginning, not the end of divine care. While the lamb has been welcomed back to the fold, there remains one crucial element of true peace that transcends even community: the shepherd's unwavering presence at the threshold between safety and danger. As night settled fully over the sheepfold, the shepherd moved with deliberate purpose through a series of final evening duties that transformed the enclosure from a gathering place into a sanctuary of perfect security. Each action reflected centuries of shepherding wisdom, checking the stone walls for any weakness where predators might attempt entry, clearing away loose branches that might startle the sheep during their slumber, and ensuring fresh water remained accessible should any awaken thirsty in the night. The rescued lamb observed these methodical preparations through increasingly heavy eyelids, its consciousness hovering in that liminal space between wakefulness and sleep. Though physically exhausted from its ordeal, the lamb remained attentive, processing the profound transition from isolation to security. Its gaze followed the shepherd's movements with quiet fascination, as if committing to memory the care being demonstrated. Each careful inspection communicated something essential about the shepherd's character. That rescue marked the beginning of his commitment, not its culmination. Having completed his inspection, the shepherd moved toward the entrance of the fold. Rather than seeking his own shelter for the night, he lowered himself to the ground directly in the opening, the singular vulnerable point where danger might enter. With practiced ease, he arranged his body across the threshold, physically becoming the living barrier between his flock and any threat that might emerge from the darkness. In this position, he could observe both the sleeping flock within and the night landscape without, maintaining vigilance even as he permitted himself rest. This positioning represented a theological truth of profound significance. The shepherd who had actively pursued the lost sheep through storm and darkness now became the vigilant guardian of their continued safety. His body at the entrance implemented in physical form the promise articulated in Hebrew scripture: Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. The consistency of divine protection transitions seamlessly from active pursuit to vigilant presence, both manifestations of the same unalterable character. The sensory landscape within the fold provided a striking contrast to the chaos the lamb had experienced mere hours before. Where there had been the threatening crash of thunder, now there existed only the gentle rhythm of collective breathing, punctuated occasionally by the soft rustling of wool against straw as a sheep adjusted position in sleep. The distant rumbles that had once signified danger now served as reminders of protection that had proven itself reliable against the most formidable elements. The penetrating cold that had threatened the lamb's survival had been replaced by the encompassing warmth of the community, a living blanket of shared body heat that maintained comfort without conscious effort. Most significant was the transformation of sound. Where the lamb had earlier heard only its own frightened bleats echoing unanswered across the hillside, it now experienced the profound comfort of multiple heartbeats and breathing patterns synchronized in communal rest. These auditory signals of collective presence created an atmosphere where vulnerability became not a liability but a natural state, as appropriate to the sheep as breathing itself. The shepherd's vigilant rest parallels the divine presence that maintains constant watchfulness, even during human moments of unconsciousness. While the flock sleeps, surrendering awareness and control, the shepherd remains alert. This arrangement establishes sleep not as a period of heightened risk, but as the purest expression of trust, a mutual covenant between protector and protected. Genuine peace becomes possible not because dangers cease to exist, but because protection exceeds their threat. Despite physical fatigue, the shepherd maintained this position of protective authority, his weathered hands resting on his staff, a symbol of authority held in reserve. When his gaze reached the recently rescued lamb, now nestled securely among its companions, a subtle smile transformed his expression. His attention contained a particular quality when directed toward the one that had been lost and found, the natural culmination of invested effort and realized hope. The lamb, sensing this protective presence, experienced an internal transformation. Its muscles, previously tense even in exhaustion, gradually released their vigilance. Its breathing deepened into the slow, regular pattern of complete rest. Most tellingly, its body position shifted from the tight, defensive curl it had maintained since its rescue to an open, extended posture that exposed its vulnerable underside, the ultimate physical expression of security. In this surrender to rest, the lamb seemed to process its journey, from the terror of isolation to the profound relief of being found, and finally to this moment of complete peace under watchful care. As minutes stretched into hours, the sheepfold settled into a profound stillness that transcended mere absence of activity. This was not the empty silence of abandonment the lamb had experienced on the hillside, but the rich quietude of presence and protection. The distant thunder, now diminished to occasional murmurs beyond the horizon, served only to accentuate the contrast between the world outside and the sanctuary within. The lamb's journey from danger to security, from isolation to community, from fear to peace reached its completion not in the dramatic moment of rescue, but in this quiet surrender to rest under watchful eyes. As our bedtime story draws to a close, consider that this ancient narrative carries profound meaning for your present moment. In the gentle transition between wakefulness and slumber, you exist within the same divine economy as that little lamb. The shepherd's attentiveness represents an eternal vigilance that encompasses your life with similar intentionality. This divine care operates beyond the boundaries of consciousness, continuing its protective watch even as you surrender to sleep. The theological reality of being known by name establishes your unique position within the Creator's attention. As you release today's tensions, emulate the lamb's posture of trust. Like the lamb nestled in protective arms, you can rest completely in divine care. Remember, the shepherd remains vigilant while you sleep,